Behind every arrivals board, behind every doorstep delivery, is a journey that needs energy. Electrification will transform many aspects of our transport system, making the way we travel and receive goods more sustainable, more energy efficient, and often cheaper. But as the global consumer becomes more empowered, what is the future for the hard-to-electrify modes of transport? Hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels hold potential, but will they scale in time to replace fossil fuels? Should hydrogen and its byproducts be focused on heavy industry rather than transport? Is the case for biofuels compatible with a world increasingly focused on food security? DNV's Transport in Transition offers an impartial forecast on the energy future of our global transport system and identifies the trends shaping mobility.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining the global launch of the latest report in DNV's Energy Transition Outlook series, the Transport in Transition report. This time, we take a deep dive into the energy transition of shipping, aviation, and road transport. The transport sector will face changes in fuel, electrification, and infrastructure, and our Transport and Transition report provides a detailed analysis of the report in these aspects through 2030 and 2050. DNV's Group President and CEO Remi Eriksen will first present the key highlights and an outlook. I will then have the pleasure to welcome prominent speakers from the industry and policy, including Secretary General of the International Transport Forum at the OECD, the CEOs of Hoegh Autoliners and Hoegh LNG, representing the maritime and LNG industries, an executive from DHL Express, representing the logistics industry with focus on aviation and biofuel, and an executive from Neste, a producer of sustainable aviation fuels and biofuels. DNV's Director for Energy Transition will also join us. And last week, I already had the opportunity to have a conversation with a senior representative for sustainable transportation from the US Department of Energy. We will also show you reflections from that conversation. But now we're curious to hear what the latest report with focus on transport in transition has to say, and I'm happy to hand over the word to Group President and CEO Remi Eriksen.
Welcome to the launch of our Transport in Transition report. It's a fuel-centric forecast, and it sets out our best estimates on cost, availability, and the likely uptake of electricity and zero-carbon fuels in transportation over the next 3 decades. Today, our global transport system is responsible for a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. In the next 3 decades, the global vehicle fleet will grow, passenger air flights will increase, and cargo ton miles at sea will expand. So, can we accommodate that growth while reducing emissions? As I will show in this presentation, much of transportation will decarbonize by mid-century, and emissions will reduce by some 40%. But by 2050, the relative contribution of transport to global emissions will have risen to 1/3, implying that the sector needs to tackle decarbonization with a much greater sense of urgency. Electricity's share across transport sectors will grow from 1% today to 4% in 2030 and 23% by 2050. And that's across all sectors in transport. In road transport, electricity meets 1/3 of energy demand by 2050, but powers nearly 80% of the global vehicle fleet. Owing to its superior efficiency, electricity really punches above its weight. Interestingly, we also see that electricity is gaining share in subsectors previously thought to be hard to electrify, like long-distance trucking. And for the very heaviest long-distance trucking, electricity will compete in increasing pace over the next 30 years. In aviation and shipping, electricity will cover by mid-century just 2% and 4% of energy use respectively. The bulk of energy use is for long-haul flights and deep-sea shipping, which cannot be electrified. Oil demand from the transport sector nearly halves by 2050. This is mainly driven by the reduction in oil for road transport. But oil is also replaced by biofuels and e-fuels in maritime and aviation. I should note that aviation oil use is virtually flat to 2050 from now on. So the growth in passenger flights is covered by biofuels and e-fuels. Direct electrification is by far the most efficient use of energy. What electrifies will be cheaper, and that is why road transport will almost completely transform in the space of a single generation. By contrast, e-fuels in road transport can be 3 to 4 times costlier than gasoline because of the low well-to-wheel efficiency. Hydrogen-based fuels and sustainable biofuels cannot compete with oil on costs, and their uptake will have to be driven by other factors, like where there are no other viable options for decarbonization. For hard-to-electrify sectors, biofuel is a ready-now drop-in fuel and is set for rapid growth this decade. But here you can see that biofuel use in road transport peaks in 2030 and tails off sharply, when it will largely be displaced by cheaper electricity. However, there is a steep uptake of biofuels in aviation and maritime, driven by regulation and consumer push. By 2050, advanced biofuels have a quarter share in aviation and possibly a fifth share in maritime. There is, however, a large uncertainty over the volume of biofuel uptake in shipping, and we elaborate more on this in our maritime forecast. The main challenge for biofuel is to make it sustainable, and there are and will be availability limits for sustainable biomass, especially in regions heavily supporting biomass use for transport, like the EU and the US. The drive for sustainability will inevitably impact the cost of biofuels, but there is a further decarbonization option, of course, in the form of hydrogen and its derivatives like ammonia and e-fuels, which will scale in maritime and aviation from the early 2030s. Please note that the renewable energy should be prioritized for direct electricity production in the near term, until sufficient surplus is available for hydrogen production at scale. In road transport, hydrogen will help to decarbonize the heaviest long-distance road segment, and within the next 10 years, we will see the first e-fuel uptake in aviation growing to 13% share of aviation fuel mix by 2030. By 2050. In maritime, there are limited alternatives to decarbonize high-sea shipping, and we foresee a 50% share of hydrogen-based fuels such as ammonia and e-fuel and e-methanol by mid-century. But significant uptake is unlikely to start before the mid-2030s, although we will see new fuel clusters forming before then, for example, in Northern Europe. For policymakers, encouraging civil society to transition faster in transport can be very challenging. Nonetheless, the policy priorities are clear. Everything that can be feasibly electrified should be electrified. Transport that cannot be electrified should be incentivized to switch to sustainable biofuel in the medium term, before a hydrogen-based fuel ecosystem can scale from national to regional and then global by the mid-2030s. Oil benefits from high energy density and established infrastructure, and only electricity outperforms fossil fuels on cost due to its superior efficiency. We believe that ramping up infrastructure for electric mobility is a challenge, but not a showstopper. Radical new technology is not likely nor necessary. But for low-income countries with less capacity in production, transmission, and distribution of electricity, EV uptake will lag high-income regions. While we need a very large investment in the production of sustainable biofuel, it has significantly supply chain synergies with the existing fossil fuel supply chain. Hydrogen and its derivatives are an order of magnitude more demanding from an infrastructure build-out and capex point of view. But hydrogen offers considerable energy security benefits, and many national hydrogen strategies are already in place or being formulated. And over the next 10 years, we will see a gradual expansion of hydrogen ecosystems and the opening up of green corridors both within shipping and aviation. As I've outlined, transport is already on track to transform at a breathtaking scale in the next 30 years. But our forecast for the most likely future for transport sees it fall very short of what is required for a net zero energy system by 2050. In fact, the forecast I have outlined today, in which transport plays a crucial role, leads to warming of 2.2 degrees by the end of this century. For net zero by mid-century, we will need to see much more rapid and comprehensive penetration of electricity, and the fuel mix for the hard-to-electrify sectors will also need to decarbonize deeper and faster. I hope that our Transport in Transition report helps our customers and their stakeholders to establish a clear-eyed view on what is possible. I believe too much is at stake to allow for either hesitation or wishful thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Remi, for providing us with insights into the new report. We heard from Remi Eriksen that our global transport system is already responsible for a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. In the next 3 decades, the global vehicle fleet is going to grow from 1.2 to 2 billion vehicles. Passenger flights will increase by 130%, and cargo ton miles at sea will expand by 35%. Can we accommodate that growth while reducing emissions? I would like to take a closer look at the job that needs to be done to decarbonize the transport sector and the very serious extra lift needed to help combat global levels of global warming. In our studio, I'm joined by Andreas Enger, CEO of Hoegh Autoliners, and Erik Nyheim, CEO of Hoegh LNG. This is not a coincidence. We invited both of you to join for the discussion to take positions from the maritime and the LNG perspectives. Also joined in the studio, I'm by Sverre Alvik, Director of Energy Transition at DNV. And online, I'm joined by Secretary General of the International Transport Forum at the OECD, Mr. Young-tae Kim. Online is also joining Bettina Patschke, VP ESG Accounting Reporting Controlling from DHL Express, and Sveta Ukkonen, Head of Maritime Fuels at Neste. Welcome to all of you. Secretary General, Mr. Kim, I know you're not able to join us for the full hour, so I would like to start with a few questions to you. In working with our customers on the energy transition, we see that a great deal of cooperation is needed. In fact, we started to say that collaboration is the new fuel. This applies particularly to aviation and maritime. And speaking for the International Transport Forum of the OECD, what is your perspective on the need of cooperation across sectors?
Thank you for the question, and good morning to you all. And first of all, I congratulate you on launching an excellent report. And I think there will be a very useful reference for the global community dealing with this important question. And in fact, the collaboration is the essential part of today, in the sense that we have challenges and opportunities at the same time. So first of all, we can think about three aspects. So first element is the technological aspect, and definitely we are now trying to introduce new fuels, but still we have to check if this new energy or energy source is safe to use or affordable to use. And I think this needs to be still examined further with the collaboration with the global partners. And also, it can have an impact on the labor market and definitely restructuring of the industry in each country. And the second, the issue can be the behavioral change of the people, because when we talk about decarbonizing transport and decarbonizing society, basically, we need to get support from the people and citizens in the society. And they have to be convinced and they have to understand why we are doing this. And also, there should be a winner and losers when we introduce new things. And that's why we need to really collaborate with the international the partners, also domestic partners. And the third, the final item is there is definitely the regulation on the new things. And we traditionally thought about the regulation as something the negative, because the terminology, the regulation sometimes give a very the tough the meaning to private sector especially. But in fact, in this reality full of uncertainty, basically relevant regulation is kind of guideline. So we have to set up a new right guidelines for the sector and for the industry. And for doing that, basically, we need to collaborate with the private sector and government sector and all together.
Thank you. Talking about regulations, actually, how do you see governments are balancing regulations and incentives? Do you see regional differences there?
Definitely. There should be incentives and regulation at the same time, but what is the right incentive and what is the right regulation is always the question. And basically, in different countries with a different level of development, we cannot provide any country with single answer. And to find the right kind of compromise between regulation and incentive and perhaps enforcement and some benefits for the sector, we need to refer to different examples of countries introducing different measures in the society. And that's why the global platform like ITF is really important. And we have Nordic countries as our members right now, and we have currently 64 member countries from different level of economies. And we really share all the different examples and experiences and so on. And so basically, we know that when we try to find a compromise, there should be two principles I put forward. So one is that we have to minimize the negative impact, because it's kind of changing our reality with a kind of artificial or midterm or long-term efforts. So we need to minimize our impact. And also, we should try to make a win-win situation, because if one party loses and one party gains, there should be definitely a social conflict in this the important effort. So I think we need to study and we need to refer to different examples.
Great, thank you. And we will also revisit the topic of incentives when listening to the representative from the US Department of Energy later. But I'm wondering if any of our speakers in the studio or online have reflections on Mr. Kim's comments.
I mean, I can pick up on the collaboration thing, because clearly what we see is, as a small company, it's very limited what you can do on your own. But if you are able to bring together the entire sort of value chain, if you're able to engage customers, and I think the government role on this is important, because obviously for decarbonization, carbon pricing is necessary to get the ball moving. And if that is, reinvested as incentives for decarbonization solutions, it will obviously go a lot faster. So the regulatory environment, both financially and otherwise, is I think extremely important for the pace and the sort of commitment of all industry players to go along this route.
Very good comment. Yeah. Sverre, yeah.
And also on collaboration, I think it's important to think of it both ways, both collaboration between companies and collaboration between regulators and companies. And as private business company, we see this clearly, and we need both going forward, which is one of the highlights we put forward in our report.
Thanks. Yes, Erik?
And I think the energy crisis that we saw last year is an example of how much you can actually get done in a short period of time when government, business, in this case, shipping companies, ports, energy companies, etc., come together. Last year, the infrastructure and everything that was built in Germany in particular, I think showed what is possible when you really push through.
Amazing effort, and also, how fast things can go when you remove some barriers in terms of processes. Yes. Any comments from the ladies online? No, that's fine.
I can add here on this collaboration and partnership that what we experience at Neste is that collaboration is actually everything. And now we are talking about also speed of change. So with this collaboration between regulators, between companies, also this public-private partnership, of course, we can accelerate the change.
Thank you, Sveta. Secretary General, Mr. Kim, thank you so much for your time. I know that you've got other commitments. Thank you for joining us, and we will now continue the discussion with the other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So let's continue. In DNV's Transport and Transition report, there seems to be a clear sequence to decarbonize transport. Electrify what you can. What you can't electrify, then use biofuel, but with focus on sustainable biofuel, and then get ready for a new hydrogen-based future. Do you agree with this sequence? Any first comments?
I can start off by, I think, challenging it a bit because I think we are working hard to decarbonize our shipping activities. We're currently using biofuel extensively, but there is a limit to supply. We are building new vessels that are methanol and ammonia ready, and I think this will happen. I think there is multiple clock speeds here because there are segments of our industry that can move much faster. There are segments that are going to take a lot longer. So I think in the big picture, I agree there is a sequence to this. Yeah. But I think in actually taking action as companies or as governments or as technology providers, I think we shouldn't think too much about the sequence and think a lot more about how to get this thing moving, because it doesn't scale before it starts. It has to start moving before it can start to scale.
Right. Other comments, Sverre? Yeah.
No, I think you are right in challenging us in the conclusion, especially when it comes to R&D, piloting, and when we talk about this order, it's more on the what will scale at the larger scene, and then at the same time and simultaneously, we need to do a lot of things together and at the same time in order to prepare ourselves for what's coming. But we have in the report, for example, said that like they plan to do in Germany and producing e-fuels for electric vehicle, for the combustion engine vehicle to use in the continuation. That is the wrong order, because first you need to reserve the fuels for production of renewable electricity, and then since you also can electrify this sector, it's a waste to use 4 times as much energy to power it with e-fuels for that. But that does not mean that you should not do a lot of things in shipping, in aviation, as we will hear later.
Just a short comment. The reason I'm saying this and pushing this is, at least our experiences in our industry, is that many players use that sequencing as an excuse to wait and see, which I think is the wrong solution regardless.
Yep. Very
fully
good
agree.
comment. Yes. Further reflections? If not, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can
Yes,
add.
Bettina.
Yeah, so definitely. So we should use the technology which are readily available. For instance, in aviation, sustainable fuels are available, and we need to push them also that production capacity gets built. Hydrogen and also PTL is not yet ready. I think funds should go in to develop this technology, especially PTL fuels, which have unlimited feedstock supply in later years. So we need to rely on those fuels to get in market and also to get at a lower cost. So in principle, I would also agree with what the report lays out in terms of priorities, and but we should also look at the future technologies like hydrogen and develop them now and push them also forward.
Great. I would actually like to continue with you, Bettina, because DHL Express, really interesting company. I think of Christmas packages and, logistics, but you told me that you have 300 aircrafts. Wow. And DHL Express announced last year a significant step towards decarbonization of the aviation logistics and being more sustainable. You also confirmed a new strategic collaboration with BP and Neste, actually, to provide more than 800 million liters of sustainable aviation fuels. Can you tell us a little bit about DHL Express and your ambitions in this area?
Yes, thanks, Ulrike, for the question. Yeah, so maybe let me start a little bit. In 2021, the group, DHL Express, is part of a bigger group, Deutsche Post DHL. We announced ESG strategy, and since then, the organization is in execution mode. Yeah, so we developed our science-based target. We got it approved last year, and then we also set, let's say, more tangible targets for the operations. Having a 30% share of sustainable aviation fuel in the air network, 30% marine fuel in the maritime sector, and 60% of our fleet is electrified. So I think all the topics you cover also in the report. And the announcement of the 800 million liters deal is what makes this deal so special, is because it starts now. It doesn't wait until 26, 27 to get supplied. It starts now. We had the first delivery in 2022. We have more delivery now in 23, and the delivery and further delivery will increase up to 26 as well. Yeah, and what I'm very proud that we measure the decarbonization efforts we do. Yeah, so we not only measure our absolute footprint, which is pretty high, 36 million tons of CO2 as a group. Majority is in aviation. 69% comes from aviation, transporting, let's say, shipments fast. And last year we reported 1 million ton decarbonization. The target for this year increased again. 1.3 million ton is our target in 2023, so this year.
Those are impressive numbers, but are your customers willing to pay a premium for green logistics?
That's a good question, because part of the ESG strategy was also to develop green products for our customers. Yeah, so a low emission product solution, so customer can basically also have low emissions on their shipments. And we believe that most of our customers will also have a decarbonization target or will have a science-based target. That's why this offer is very much required also by our customers. Yeah, many of them have even zero targets, net zero targets in 2030. Yeah, and others in 2040. And I think what also was mentioned in your report, in the DNV Transport and Transition report, is that especially biofuels don't come with a cost parity to fossil fuel. They are coming at additional cost. And this means also the reduction of a ton CO2 comes at a cost. And I'm just returning last week, Deutsche Post DHL basically made a huge investment into also customer communication. We met more than 1,000 customers and a sustainability stakeholder in a big customer event. Sveta's colleague from Neste was also there, not only customer, but also main stakeholders. And we discussed with customers how we can build a sustainable supply chain. Yeah, this logistics supply chain. So we spoke about book and claim, customer emission reporting, reusable packaging. So all the aspects which are interesting for our customers and to make them aware what we can offer and what also other industry players offer.
Thank you, Bettina. Before moving over to Sveta, just one question, because you are actually an expert. You're working in finance. You mentioned ESG targets. So what is the role of evolving ESG standards driving the decarbonization? Just a brief answer. I know you touched up on it already in terms of the supply chain.
Standards and policy have a huge role to play. Yeah, so policy we heard already from Mr. Kim, and I see super great examples, for instance, with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US and also with the Advanced Fuel Fund in the UK. So a huge dynamic. It is basically raised a huge dynamic, especially in the sustainable fuel market. In terms of standards, they also play a super great big role in terms of that the number of companies which need to report on sustainability topics is increasing, and that's why also get measured on them. So this will help also a great deal in terms of getting awareness, and then also being aware that they need logistics, low emission logistic transport solution like we offer in DHL.
Thank you, Bettina. Now moving over to Neste. And Sveta, Neste is the world's leading producer of sustainable aviation fuel, renewable diesel and renewable feedstock solutions. Sveta, you're the head of marine fuels, but I'm actually also curious to hear about biofuels in general. Can we maybe start with biofuels and then move over to marine fuels? What is Neste's view on the best ways of ensuring that the biofuels of the future are sustainable? What are the challenges and barriers that you see as a producer of biofuels?
Thank you, Ulrika, and thank you for inviting Neste to this exciting publishment of the report. Yes, as you said, Neste is a leading producer of biofuels today, and actually we started production of biofuels already a decade ago, so very well in time, and our main mission is to create healthier planet for the next generation. And actually what we do is we are helping our customers to reduce their CO2 emissions. Last year we helped to reduce 11 million tons of CO2, and by 2030 we want to achieve already 20 million tons of CO2 reduction. So also in the report it was outlined, and we at Neste strongly believe that biofuels will play a role in decarbonization. In sector of transportation, the main emissions are coming from road transportation. That is why, especially in EU, there are mandates for road transportation, how much of GHG reduction has to be achieved on different national levels, or what part of renewable energy has to be in the road. And we've been an owner, and we enable to reduce lots of emissions in road transportation. So next, now we are very much concentrating on aviation, and of course I'm representing here marine fuels, and I have to say that we are also focusing on helping our shipping companies, our customers in maritime sector to reduce emissions. So yes, we do believe that biofuels have a role to play, and also what I would like to highlight, what was also mentioned in your report, that we need to look for truly sustainable biofuels. Unfortunately, great news are that there were first generation feedstocks in use that, for example, Neste is not using anymore, and now we are very much focusing on waste and residues.
And what's your outlook on the marine fuels?
On marine fuels, it's so that we noticed today in the report that we believe that 80% of road transportation will be electrified. There are solutions today. Lots of biofuels are used in road transportation. Aviation will come next. So there are already regulations in place. For shipping companies, we do have solutions, but I have to say that actually it is not easy to sell those. So there are companies who are very much focused on their emissions, on sustainability targets, but this is only peak of an iceberg. So if we want to really to decarbonize also shipping, we need regulations, and of course in shipping it is also so that one see use of, for example, biofuels as an opportunity, as a differentiator factor, but others, if they have a different type of cargoes on board or tankers, it is difficult for them because it's as said, it is costly, and it's costly because of the fact that waste and residue, it's not a crude oil, so there is not such an economy of scale. And you can imagine we are working with restaurants, and we basically gather feedstocks from one restaurant to another, from one slaughtering house to another, from one fishing farm to another. So it's completely different feedstock.
I think that's a good transition to talk to our ship owner here. So Hoegh Autoliners, Andreas, is a leading global provider of transportation services within the roll-on, roll-off, ro-ro segment.
Yeah. And I think it just to make the link complete, you know, we actually are routinely bunkering biofuel on a large number of our vessels, and we have trade lanes with customers that run basically pay for using biofuel for their cargo share on certain trade lanes. So biofuel is something we're already using, but as you said, the sustainable biofuel we can get is recycled cooking oil, and it's not entirely scalable, or at least then the Belgians have to eat them lots more French fries. But,
more fries, okay.
But we are using it routinely, and I think it's a good bridge. And for us, it also demonstrates, I think, the commitment from our customers. And because what's unique for us is the fact that, you know, we might be the tip of the iceberg, but we are serving, you know, leading OEMs in automotive and equipment industry, including trucking, who are one of the drivers of electrifying and decarbonizing road transport and construction sites.
Yeah, because I was just going to say, I mean, you're transporting electric vehicles, so the owners of electric vehicles, they don't want these vehicles to be transported on ships that are that don't have low emissions.
That's true, and that's also why I'm sort of opposing a bit to the sequencing, because I think it's very right to say that in the grand scheme, there is a sequencing, and it is a long journey to decarbonize deep sea shipping. But it has to start somewhere. And I think it's important that we as ship owners look at how we can develop products. And we are, you know, now we have an investment program, we have a fleet renewal program that also came because we
tell us about your plans.
We needed to renew our fleet, but you know, all the vessels that we are currently building are built with actually the first ordered LNG propulsion, but ammonia and methanol ready. With conversions. And we have signed the letter of intent with MAN, which is the largest engine producer, and also actually working with Wärtsilä, who's producing auxiliary engines. And we have a written agreement to try to get ammonia-powered vessels on the water by 2026.
Fantastic.
And on top of that, we now have LOIs with multiple very serious fuel producers around the world for actually getting green ammonia in the same timeline. So we have a very ambitious plan, but I want to make one sort of qualifier on that. The reason we believe that we can go so fast and so hard into this because we have carbon conscious customers and we are, you know, transporting decarbonized
you pay
cargo,
the premium,
right? So we believe there is a case for a premium. I don't think we could do this if we had not been able to design all of this in multi-fuel configurations that gives us cover if it is delayed or if it takes longer. And I don't think we could have done it if not, you know, we are a shipping company with 100 years of history. We have huge experience, and we do everything in-house and have huge experience in actually designing and managing ships. So we have been able to build all this optionality into the vessels, which combined with all the other improvements we made, we basically believe that the vessels we're building will deliver as good or better returns than the standard ships available, even in a fossil future. But we create all this optionality, because I think in the current environment, optionality is key, but I think it's also quite quite likely that we as ship owners will need that optionality in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
So that's why we're focusing on it.
So you're one of the front runners in the industry then. The IMO is expected to increase its decarbonization goals later this year. How do you think these heightened ambitions will be received by the maritime sector?
I mean, I can only talk for ourselves, and we are very pleased that shipping is introduced into the ETS scheme in the EU. We're very pleased with the increased requirements coming in the Fuel EU maritime arrangements, and I mean basically what we are saying is that we believe that credible carbon pricing, traded in or basically used for contracts of difference and other things to stimulate fuel, can massively increase the pace of this transition, and we think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And obviously, others might have other positions based on their plans and strategies, but that's how it is.
Let's move over to another Hoegh company, Hoegh LNG. Erik, you operate floating LNG terminals, but also have some LNG carriers. LNG is a step forward in lowering emissions. What role will LNG play going forward, and what is your long-term strategy at Hoegh LNG?
So I think, first of all, on the transition on fuels, I think every shipping segment will have a different path towards zero emission. As Andreas is focused on biofuels and ammonia, our path is a little bit different in the way that LNG carriers mostly run on the cargo. Because the tanks are not perfectly insulated. Some of the LNG, which is minus 163 degrees, will have some boil-off. And that boil-off is what is used to fuel the engines. So that's a pretty efficient system.
Very unique.
Efficient system. It avoids wasting the boil-off. And of course, LNG is a transition fuel. So it probably does not make sense to change that. However, while we do run 3 LNG carriers currently, we are mostly focused on FSRUs and floating terminals, as you mentioned. And here we have a very different approach. Because they stay in port for long durations at the time, our ambition is to bring them to zero emission as quickly as possible over the next few years by doing 2 things. So first of all, to regas the LNG from minus 163 and into a gasified state, we need warm water. And instead of boiling that water on board with gas, we will try to source that from spill water from nearby plants. We're already doing that in Brunsbüttel together with our partners as a first project. And secondly, we will try to get power from shore in any location that we can. And by doing those 2 things, you can really bring it down to zero emission. And the first place we'll be able to do that is probably in Germany over the next very few years. But then we think we have a role to play beyond LNG as well. As with the capabilities we have in developing, operating, and owner marine energy infrastructure, we think that is also highly relevant into other value chains, and particularly into carbon capture and storage, but also ammonia and hydrogen. And specifically on carbon capture, we're developing a partnership with Aker BP based on the Poseidon license that they were awarded recently, where we will be part of developing the marine infrastructure to make that possible. And another project we're involved in together with Wärtsilä is to develop a large ammonia to hydrogen cracker, which is being partly funded by Innovation Norway. We recently received 60 million NOK to do that. So, we're pretty excited about also participating into these other value chains, which will also serve shipping segments as well as industry.
Great to hear about your innovation efforts. Thank you. Sverre, I've got a question for you. Electricity will, without doubt, be the main decarbonization route for transport, powering nearly 80% of world's passenger vehicle fleet by 2050. But electricity might be cheap and efficient, but the infrastructure to allow electricity to revolutionize the transport sector isn't easy or cheap. The new transport forecast still says that electricity will be the winner. What is the story behind this, and how did your research team, come to this conclusion?
Thank you, Ulrike. On the road transport, there is, in our view, as you say, no view that electricity is the clear winner. And we have actually been advocating this ever since we started with our forecasting in 2017, that by 2032 or 33, half of the vehicles sold worldwide will be electric. We have not changed that over that period. What we have changed, and where we see surprises, I would say, is on what's happening on the heavier vehicles. Because although there still will be a role for hydrogen and possibly biofuel for the heaviest vehicles, we see that electricity is penetrating segments that we, until a few years ago, thought would not be possible. The progress is faster within the electric part of the e-mobility or of the mobility than of the hydrogen and biofuel one. Then why is electricity winning? Well, I think it's important to note that on the one side, electricity is extremely efficient when it comes to how it uses energy. And a combustion engine has an efficiency of 25, 30, possibly 40% on a big engine ship, while electric engine has an efficiency of 90%. So that is the one reason. The other one is that electricity can fairly easy be carbon neutral. So with these two, there is no doubt that sort of the vehicles are ready, the prices will come down, and then the obstacles still are the infrastructure. Infrastructure in the low-income, middle-income countries, which are not set up for using electricity everywhere. So that's the two barriers we see. It's the very heavy vehicles, and it's the countries with poor or lack of electric infrastructure, where there will be a time lag before these countries and regions also will electrify.
Thank you. That's actually a good link over to the conversation I had with the representative from the US Department of Energy. He also mentioned the heavy trucking in the US. As mentioned to you earlier, I had the opportunity to talk to Michael Berube, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Sustainable Transportation in the US Department for Energy. That's a long title. And I would like to share some highlights of our conversation with you now. Good morning, Michael. Thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a bit about your role to start with?
Well, thank you so much for having me here today, and I'm really glad to be able to join this event. I work here in the U.S. Department of Energy, and really my goal, my whole team's effort is how do we decarbonize all of the transportation sector? So we work across everything from light-duty cars on the road to heavy trucks, aviation, rail, maritime, so across all aspects of transportation. And our team's job is everything from understanding what the avenues can be to get to decarbonization, actually developing those new technologies, whether it's batteries or hydrogen, and then working on deploying those across the entire ecosystem. So working closely with the private sector as well as a key part of that strategy.
That's exciting. Thank you. I would like to start talking about biofuels. There are two main issues: ensuring that biofuel that is used is sustainable, and balancing its use between aviation and maritime, being the two sectors that both need more sustainable biofuels. What are the US plans for the use of biofuels in aviation and maritime?
You know, I think first it's something we should reflect on how amazing it is that we are talking about deep decarbonization across these two sectors that maybe 5 years ago, many would have said wasn't even in the conversation. We do see that biofuels, including that fuels from any waste carbon resource, will be incredibly important. We have focused on sustainable aviation fuel because we see that's where the vast majority of those low carbon liquid fuels from waste carbon resources, whether it's biomass or carbon dioxide or CO gas or municipal solid waste. We have a major factory here in the US essentially starting to create those liquid biofuels from municipal solid waste. So sustainable aviation fuel, we think, will take up the vast majority of that because there is not other good options for really addressing the bulk of aviation. when you make sustainable aviation fuel, you also will get other cuts of fuel, just the way the refining process works. And so if you look at biasing towards sustainable aviation fuel, you'll still get significant volumes of other fuels that can be used in maritime.
How will heavy long-haul trucking in the US look like in 10 years' time? What will be the biggest contributors in emission reduction from this hard-to-electrify market segment?
We've been working quite extensively on trucking, both short and long-haul trucking for a while now, and we see a lot of opportunity to move to very low greenhouse gas and zero-emission trucks. In fact, we foresee that the economics will drive this sector, and it's possible that when you get towards 2028, 2030, in that time frame, that trucks could overtake the light-duty sector because there are different economics that are driving it. We recently published a significant study that showed by 2030, close to 45% of all trucks, medium and heavy duty, will be more cost-effective to own and operate under zero-emission technologies.
That's interesting to hear. And when it comes to the infrastructure for battery charging, the US is big. So what are the plans in terms of infrastructure investments?
There are significant investments happening right now, $7.5 billion, in fact, under the legislation, the infrastructure law passed a year ago. And that covers both light duty and heavy duty. Now, heavy duty has unique challenges, but also maybe some opportunities. Initially, much of the battery electric heavy duty trucks will be ones that are going point to point. They're returning home, essentially, if you will, at the end of their day. That in the United States, it's a big country, so you do have ones that don't do that, but still the vast majority of trips, the trucks return to a home base. They're doing, if you will, a bit of a hub and spoke type system versus driving across the whole country. And that allows you to electrify those large warehouses and depots. It also allows you to charge the trucks overnight, which, of course, is easier to do than if you have to charge them more quickly while they're traveling on the road.
I've got one final question for you, and that is in relation to policies. The IRA focus is on stimulating the transition via incentives. Are incentives alone sufficient to achieve the desired results across all transportation sectors? And what are other policy tools that the Biden administration is planning to implement or is considering?
The IRA and the incentives are game-changing, and they are what's needed, certainly. But in addition, there's significant amount of investment in infrastructure that is needed and that is happening. Previously, the bipartisan infrastructure law unleashed billions, over $100 billion of investment available, much of that in the transportation space. So that will help provide the infrastructure side, whereas the IRA provides some of the incentive side, both on the manufacturing and on the consumer side. There are policies, as you mentioned earlier, the proposal by the US EPA on fuel economy standards that are part of the mix. And importantly, there are significant R&D activities. And we're at a point now where we have all those elements coming together. It's why we are very optimistic that we think we will get to that full transportation decarbonization.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights, Michael. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Michael Barrowby sounds very optimistic. Are you as optimistic and feel that the market can do the job? Or do you think we are more dependent on regulations to achieve our goals? And just a follow-up question, do you think there's a potential to accelerate the transition of transport even faster? Maybe some very short answers to that. I know it's difficult, but...
I think I maybe answered it, but I think the combination... I think it's important that the market works and that obviously the willingness to pay is exploded like we do with transporting the low-carbon cargo. But the combination of real carbon pricing channeled into real incentives for using low carbon solutions is absolutely essential to accelerate the process.
Thanks.
I agree. I think the cost of the different fuels will have a big impact in the speed of adoption, and here the incentives will play a big role. And I think the IRA is a game changer that will bring down the landed cost in Europe and elsewhere significantly, and it will be interesting to see how Europe now follows up with similar incentives, and I'm sure that will also fast track some of these fuels.
Very true.
Yeah, I think we should separate between electricity, which only will need economic stimuli in the start, because ultimately it will be cheaper. And then we have the bio and hydrogen fuels in the areas that cannot electrify. And I think Andreas showed it or demonstrated it earlier. You both had environmental conscious customers who's then willing to push it, and you have regulations. So in especially in biofuel and in hydrogen, you need strong regulations, but it's also helped by environmental conscious customers pushing for this.
Thank you. What do you think, Bettina?
Yeah, so I'm very positive. We see a lot of movements in policies development, also in standard development. Are we already there? No, we are not. We need now corporates to make targets, ideally bold targets, in order to move forward. That would be my very short answer. And I'm very optimistic that we're moving forward, and the speed will be faster. I think what we have achieved in the last 10 years will now be achieved in 2 years' time. So there is a lot of dynamic in the market, what I can observe.
Thank you. What about you, Sveta?
I'm also very positive, and we can see positive data in your report published, so we are moving there. Unfortunately, the data, when we look at the data for maritime, EBA published some numbers that less than 1% in maritime were alternative fuels. So it seems that lots of companies are doing something, but on a small scale. So if we truly want to decarbonize, then we need regulations. And with IMO regulations, we see that in 2015 we had a SECA area. It was well prepared, and it happened, and also everybody was concerned about competitiveness and cost efficiency, but it happened. 2020 IMO 2020 fuel 0.5 fuel and sulfur regulations, it happened. So I think if we truly want to achieve an impact, then we need regulations.
Thank you. Wow, we're really ending on a positive note here, but there's still a job that needs to be done. It was a great conversation about the transport in transition, about innovation, regulations, incentives, hearing from the industry and the policy side. Thank you so much to our great guests here in the studio and online, and our fantastic audience. If you would like to download the report or the executive summary, please go to our website where you find both. And thank you again, and goodbye.